You're listening to This Ish with Lipitz. I'm your host, and welcome to episode 3 called Bug Up Bill, about someone's journey marked by adversity and resilience. Before we delve into how it feels to get a phone call informing you have cancer and next thing you lose a huge chunk of your nose, we'll dissect the anatomy of what happens to a teenage boy when his mom leaves him and how his following emotional blockage turns to alcohol and sex addiction, and how fear of intimacy, fear of abandonment, fear of losing unconditional love, and how seeking achievements is a cry for love becomes guiding factors in a man's life until he does some serious work on himself and meets a soulmate. So, join me in this in-depth conversation with Bill Gurr on these subjects. My interest in these issues is, as I mentioned in episode 1, I experienced being cancelled by my dad as a teen, and like the mom in Bill's story here, I decided to take a different journey than stay in my family. More on that in a future episode. So, let's hear Bill's story. I sat down with him in Malibu, California.
When I was 16, my mom got remarried. My mom and dad got divorced when I was about 12, and I lived with my mom and my sister. And then my mom met a man, fell in love. It was their choice to move from Phoenix, Arizona, where we were living, to upstate New York. And they invited me to go with them. When it was clear that they were going to leave Phoenix, I then knew, well, I'm going to live with my dad. I knew that was coming. I also was very successful in athletics, like really successful. I was right in the middle of between junior year and my senior year in high school, where I was a state champion. And to move and to leave all that and move to New York didn't seem like the best decision. And so even though they invited me to go, I chose not to. As soon as I knew my mom was leaving, I began the process of kind of shutting down. And that barrier that I had begun to construct to prepare myself for this was shattered the night I was going to have to say goodbye to her. I remember really clearly, I was in a room with my mom and her soon-to-be husband, and I was overwhelmed with sadness and grief, and any effort that I'd made to mask that were shattered, and I began sobbing. It's hard for me to fathom what life was going to be moving forward without my mom. I mean, I had a wonderful relationship with my mom. She was everything to me. I remember, like, early on when I was running track and I would come home and the first thing I wanted to do was show her these ribbons and these trophies and these different things that I had won. I mean, I lived for her. I lived to make her proud of me, which is a whole other story around the notion that the more we achieve, the more we will be loved, which manifested itself later in my life. So that night, when I was crying, my stepdad told me to buck up, which is sort of a slang term for pull yourself together, stop crying. And I couldn't. I managed to make it out of that room in that apartment and went and sat in my car. And I remember at that time, you still had car keys in the 70s. And there was a little chrome piece on the side of the steering column where the key went in. And I just put my head on the steering wheel and looked at that little chrome keyhole and just wept. And very conflicted because I'd just been told I needed to pull myself together. And at the same time, I was experiencing overwhelming emotion that I think in retrospect was appropriate to the circumstance. And so then I don't remember much after that, really, in my life in relation to deep emotion. I went through a period of time in which I continued to try to, achieve in athletics. But what was a lot easier was to drink and to have superficial sexual relationships with as many partners as I could, as a kind of a validation of my worth. I got scholarship offers from schools, universities, and I chose to go to a school that had the weakest track program of the schools that were offering me scholarships. I chose not to leave. I wanted to stay close to maybe my dad or my sister or who knows. And so then from that point, it was downhill in terms of drinking and promiscuity and relationships that were short-lived. There was always sort of an 18-month limit because there was comfort in having a relationship, but under my terms, with the degree of intimacy that I was willing to risk. And that continued my whole adult life until I became, I think, addicted to pornography and pursuing women that kind of validated a negative belief system in myself. You're not good enough. I don't want you. Very painful. And so I was sober, but I realized I also needed to go to other programs that dealt with this issue. And I did. And I learned, and I began to patch or try to find some solidarity or some autonomy and self-acceptance about who I was and what I had to offer and how I thought about myself. Began to recognize that, my achievements were not correlation to the degree of love that I was deserving of. And so I went on a year where I was celibate, and I invested myself in painting. I had this canvas that was nailed on the wall in my kitchen in my little guest house that I had in the Hollywood Hills. And any time I felt like calling the number of a person that I knew would make me feel like shit about myself, or if I wanted to engage in some sort of interaction with pornography, I would paint. And then I met my wife. It was a 4th of July party, and there she was.
How old were you then?
43. 43. So that was a long time of thrashing around,
From 16 to 43.
Yeah, I was thrashing around, trying to achieve, trying to be a track star, trying to be a movie star, trying to be anything I could be so that people would love me.
You think all in relation to your mom leaving?
I think there's some connection there. I think that when someone has a paradigm or a personal experience in which love is unconditional, when we don't have to question whether love is going to leave, it's not to say we don't need to commit ourselves to self-improvement and personal growth and challenge. The element or the variable of love leaving is a powerful one. And I think it cannot be underestimated in my life how that played out for me. You mentioned earlier this notion of abandonment, and I think we hear about that all the time, and I think there's huge truth to it, but I think the degree to which an effort needs to be made to deconstruct the fear of abandonment cannot be understated because it's visceral.
What do you mean?
You can intellectually understand it. You can say, oh, I'm afraid of abandonment. Oh, okay, I need to do whatever. I need to believe in myself. I need to know my own self-worth. I need to understand that love is not connected to achievement. I think that all those things you can understand intellectually, but I think to fully realize them is very difficult. And the only way...
By fully realizing, what do you mean?
Well, you cannot do it. You cannot do it intellectually. You have to experience it. And the only way that you can experience is by doing it. Karen and I had this experience where she was, I believe, in the middle of an emotional breakdown. She was in crisis. She was flailing and lost. when we came together and it became very clear that this intimacy that was beginning to evolve between her and I was triggering a lot of emotion in both of us, which was uncontrollable. She was crying a lot. By me witnessing the vulnerability of her crying a lot and being confused allowed me to do that as well without this fear of bucking up. There was a tremendous power there. There was a reciprocity of need that we were feeding off of each other. And we, Karen and I talk about this notion of a similar wound, And so we got married largely because she needed a green card. That's why we got married. And there is no way that her and I would be together today if we hadn't gotten married. No way. Because at the 1.5 year mark, it would have been just like every other relationship I've ever had. And her as well. It would have been over. But because we were married, we went to therapy, we worked hard together and individually. And you begin to feel change. Because it is, like you said, it's internal. It's not intellectual. There's nothing intellectual about it. There's a shift that happens, and when you can, or I could, sense, autonomy, and at the same time, risk intimacy. And trust me, it is still a huge challenge that I need to work on every day. And it plays itself out mostly in the area of intimacy and sexuality. But that's perhaps another podcast. So I'm sitting right in the exact spot that I'm sitting now on this couch. I answer the phone. I saw that it was the dermatologist. I was fully prepared for this to be a short report if everything's okay. And the dermatologist said, "We got your pathology report, and I'm sorry to tell you that you have." And I still was not alarmed. And then I hear her say, "Malignant melanoma." And melanoma, as everyone knows, is not a word that you want to hear. And malignant melanoma, I don't know if there's any other kind. Those two words together made me, I remember it still wasn't registering. And she continued to speak. And I heard her say, "I'll set up a referral for a surgical oncologist." Still, I'm sitting and listening. She went on and said, "It may require removing lymph nodes." And then I heard her say, "It's the worst possible place you could have it." I hung up the phone. That conversation was maybe 5 minutes. And I called my wife in, and I then felt deep remorse, sadness. And I was crying at that time. I said, "I'm sorry. I have a malignant melanoma." I don't remember exactly what she said, but she wasn't emotional. She asked questions. What's next? And then I began to feel this frightened, sort of metallic feeling in my chest, shutting down, beginning to, construct the fortress around my emotions. And Karen took over.
So, Bill, before you talked about the program, you have a method in the program?
Yeah, well, I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober a long time. And one of the central tenets to that program is to not isolate, because that's where your alcoholism wants you to be, alone and frightened. But that's what I did. I didn't tell my sober friends. I didn't talk about it in meetings, largely because I didn't want to hear anyone's experiences, positive or negative. I didn't want to go online and look at what potentially could be happening to me. I just closed it all down. And in many ways, I just let Karen take over. making, follow-up calls and orchestrating doctor's appointments and everything that needed to happen. And I went about trying to live my life as normally as I could. That was right around Thanksgiving. And so Thanksgiving and then Christmas, and trying to, be optimistic on the outside and dead on the inside.
At the time, were you aware why you shut down?
It was really clear to me that I was editing what I was willing to share, particularly at meetings and with anyone other than my closest friends. Because if you have a cancer diagnosis, it's a big deal and it's always on your mind, always. In fact, there are these pivotal moments in our lives where, whether it's my mom leaving or being told to buck up, or this was a pivotal moment in my life because it was the first time I received confirmation that I was not different. I was susceptible to the bad phone call. I was susceptible to and became more aware of my own mortality. And up until that point, there was a part of me that felt immortal, that the test results are always going to be fine. It changed something fundamentally in me where the universe told me, no, you're not. You get the phone call too.
So you did not want to talk to your friends or relations because you didn't want to hear their stories. I find that interesting because if something's up or wrong, I immediately start researching frenetically, or if it's a person close to me, I research to understand what's up for them. So I find it interesting that you consciously or subconsciously would close that door, not talking to people so you wouldn't hear their stories.
Yeah, because I don't care about their stories. On some level, their stories were either going to provide me false hope or terrify me more than I already was. And I couldn't see the value in that. There were very basic things that needed to be done. One, get this melanoma off my nose and find out whether it spread to the rest of my body. That was it. Everything else was just conjecture. So I tried to control the amount of information that I was receiving. I needed to trust that the doctors were going to cut the tip of my nose off. Another competent physician, surgeon, was going to put my nose back together, and that's all I knew. The appointments on this day, the test results said this. Those two things I was hungry for. When and what? People are just attending to you. You're just being wheeled around and bright lights and asked some perfunctory questions and okay, you need. And then, like any alcoholic, I was very much looking forward to the anesthesia. Give me the anesthesia as quickly as possible. I woke up 4.5 hours later. I had a tremendous scar that went from my scalp to my brow, where they took a piece of skin and preserved the artery between the brow and flipped. And then it became waiting. Did they get all the cancer from my nose? Was there any cancer found in the 6 lymph nodes that they took out of my neck? And Karen she took such tremendous care of me because I was pretty much immobile. I certainly didn't want to go out in public. I looked ghastly, and there was a certain amount of attention that needed to be directed towards this wound and this hunk of skin that was laying on the bridge of my nose. And
before you went into the operation, did you know exactly what they were going to do?
The surgeon came to me and he said, we're going to do the forehead flap. He had also mentioned a procedure in which they just take a small flap off of your cheek and somehow wrap it over. And he said, no, we're going to do the other one. It's a pain in the ass for 3 or 4 months, but the outcome is better. He goes, trust me. And I was like, oh my God. I don't remember there being a strong concern about the cosmetic aftermath of this. I'd seen pictures. The surgeon had shown me these are the results of other patients. But I was more concerned with whether the melanoma had spread to other parts of my body. That was my biggest concern. I got a phone call and I saw that it was the surgeon. I knew that the next words I was going to hear were important and life-altering potentially. And she said, there's no evidence of melanoma in your lymph nodes. And I just burst out crying. like hard, and no one was there. She could hear, and she said, "I assume that these are tears of joy." And I said, "Yes."
Were they?
Yeah, relief. That affirmed to me that there's still a lot left in the tank, so to speak. Your life changes when you get a phone call that says you have cancer. Not because you have cancer, but because it confirms that you are mortal and that you are not an exception. I get it. Some people get that phone call or get that information when they're children. Some people, but for me, it shifted the degree to which I recognize my own mortality. It shifted how, if I am cultivating unhappiness in my life, it is something I need to pay attention to and turn it around to the best of my ability, and to live more fully, to not take time for granted. Our time, is finite. And so we have a mutual friend who we shared an experience with, one of your good friends. And we went to her studio, and she was talking with such great passion about her work. You may recall, I was emotional. I somehow felt like I didn't need to buck up under those circumstances in that company. And she looked at me, and this was a year and a half ago, and she said, "You're starving." And that comment was so accurate, and it allowed me to reflect on how much time of my life I have experienced pursuing things that I don't love. So just like deconstructing the debilitating, limiting belief systems coming from abandonment cannot be fixed intellectually, I think the same is true in relation to cultivating and sustaining a sense of gratitude for the moment, sustaining and cultivating a courage about the degree to which we commit ourselves to the people and to the efforts and to the things that we love. And right now, I've been lucky enough to have a ceramic studio across the street, and it's been just a great joy. And I've gone down this creative path, and there's been acknowledgement for the degree to which I can produce beautiful objects, and I have to ward off everyone. Might as well have on, "Do you love me now? Do 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 you love me now?" And so I realized that all of it, or much of it, or at least some of it, is a way for me to distance myself from a creative project which I really want, a painting that I want to, and there's a lot of my paintings in here, but there's a painting that I want to do that I'm afraid to start because I'm afraid I can't do it. And there won't be an opportunity for people to love me. There'll be an opportunity for me to go, yeah, you're an amateur. Versus ceramics, a lot of validation right out of the gate. But it has put on hold my commitment to painting. And I know you paint, and I think your work is really, really interesting. I haven't seen too much lately, but I like the stuff that you were doing. I love you for that.
Thank you.
So, time is limited, and this experience with melanoma and cancer has really brought that to the forefront for me.
Isn't it interesting that we know we're not going to live forever? There's a time ahead that we will no longer be, at least what we are now. Maybe we'll be something else. Maybe we'll be an energy. Who knows what we believe in? But we do know with our minds and hearts that we expire. So it's interesting that being diagnosed with cancer, for instance, is the point where many realize, there's an expiration date. And from that point on, the perspective changed on many levels, such as don't engage in unhappiness, live healthy, do this and that, and don't do this or that. So we kind of wait for that call to make these decisions to change attitude and behavior. Isn't that interesting?
You could go full circle on this, and I could say that when I knew at 8, 10 years old that I was an artist, when I knew that that was the proclivity that resonated in me more than anything else, didn't know why, just the way it was, didn't question it. In a way, just like emotion, when you're a child, or an adult, the fewer people or influences that you have around you that are saying that's wrong. I mean, yeah, when I destroyed hotel rooms in fits of alcoholism, that's wrong. That's really clear. But when I'm crying because my mom is leaving, that's not wrong. When I'm drawing and creatively trying to express myself, and someone is saying, you can't make a living doing that, in my opinion, it's a questionable thing to tell someone. Your natural proclivity will not lead to commerce. However, as a caveat, I'm really glad I was a teacher for 25 years and went and got my degree in business and, all that. And now I have a pension. And yeah, I could say, you know what? If my mom hadn't told me there's no future in art, go get a business degree, my life would be different. Would it be worse or better? I don't know. I don't have kids, but if I did, I can guarantee you I would let them cry and I would let them pursue what they love and stay out of the results.
And what?
Stay out of the results. If you don't make it, I'm not gonna be here to pay your rent. Let me just tell you that. But if this is your love, if this is what you feel resonates with you naturally, pursue it. Pursue it with all your heart. I know what my mom did was an act of love in her mind.
You mean what?
Her saying, discouraging me from, get
you from becoming a starring artist?
Yeah. I went and took this test, and before I knew it, I was a teacher and an administrator and a school bureaucrat for 25 years.
Bypassing your real.
All of it.
And only now that you're
retired. Cancer. Delphine, you're starving. Because that simple sentence, that simple observation, you were there when she said it. And to you, it didn't seem revelatory. But for me, it distilled and articulated a sense of internal reality that could not be denied.
And so that's it for this episode. Thanks to Bill Gurr for sharing his experiences, feelings, and thoughts with us. From Bill's story, I think we have an opportunity to learn not only to let go of fear of abandonment, but really attempt to not nurture feeling self-pity if or when we're faced with poignant life events such as abandonment, get a diagnosis, and such. And most profoundly, I think we can be inspired to follow an urge, a dream, or a sense of what we really want to do with our lives when we feel it, be it early in our lives or later on, to follow our gut, so to speak. Stay tuned for episode 4, which will be in the category Scenes from Here, meaning I'll be sharing a story or two. I haven't decided yet if it'll be on what it was like to work with Prince and Mariah Carey, most importantly what I learned from that, or it'll be on what it was like to be cancelled by my father and what impact it had on my life, or something altogether different. We'll see. This podcast is created and produced by me, Lepels, with thanks to Perle Film, Claus Jonsen, and Rikke Hallund. Stay tuned.